First contact. High Admiral Lyra Neven stood at the panoramic viewing window of the Aetherian Defense Station Helios, her crystalline form refracting the starlight into dancing patterns across the command deck. The massive station, shaped like a blooming flower with its crystal petal arrays, was the pride of the Aetherian collective, a beacon of their philosophical dedication to beauty and peace. But today that peace was shattered. "Confirm those readings," she commanded, her voice carrying the musical tones characteristic of her species. The holographic displays surrounding her workstation pulsed with urgent red warnings. "Confirmed, High Admiral," responded First Observer Talon, his crystalline fragments clicking nervously. 27 vessels of unknown configuration approaching from the Perseus arm. Energy signatures exceed anything in our database by several orders of magnitude. Lyra's outer layers rippled with concern, sending rainbow cascades across the command deck. The Aetherian collective had mapped this sector of space for millennia, cataloging every spacefaring race they encountered. Their philosophy of peaceful exploration and cultural exchange had served them well, leading to the formation of the Galactic Concordat, a loose alliance of civilized species. But there were stories that made even the most seasoned Aetherian explorers vibrate with fear. Stories of a species that evolved on a death world, whose very biology was forged in violence and struggle. A species that had somehow survived their own destructive nature to reach the stars. "Humans. Display visual," Lyra ordered, and the main viewing screen shimmered to life. The ships that appeared made her crystalline core pulse with dread. Unlike the elegant, organic lines of Aetherian vessels, these were angular monstrosities of black metal and weapon ports. They moved with impossible precision for their size, like predators stalking prey. "Match against restricted archives," she commanded, though she already knew what the answer would be. Match found. 99.7% probability. Human warships. Classification: Dreadnought class. The command deck erupted in a symphony of frightened chimes as junior officers' crystalline forms vibrated with panic. Humans weren't supposed to be in this sector. They'd stayed in their own space for decades, appearing only occasionally to deal with pirates or other threats, leaving destruction in their wake. "Signal the Collective Council," Lyra ordered, forcing harmony into her voice. "Begin evacuation procedures for the civilian sectors." "High Admiral." Talon's voice cracked like breaking crystal. "The fleet. They're changing course. They're heading directly for us." The human ship's movement was wrong. Nothing that large should be able to maneuver so precisely. The Aetherians built their ships for efficiency and grace. But these vessels moved like apex predators, defying the laws of physics themselves. "They're scanning us," Talon reported. "Our defensive fields. They're not just penetrating them, High Admiral. It's as if our fields don't exist." Lyra felt the weight of command settle onto her crystalline core. The station housed 50,000 civilians, scientists, artists, families. The Aetherians weren't warriors. Their defensive capabilities were meant to deter pirates, not face something like this. "Open all channels," she ordered. If these were truly humans, perhaps they could be reasoned with. The stories were unclear on this point. Some said humans respected courage, others that they saw it as a challenge. Before she could transmit, the human fleet sent its own message. The words appeared in perfect Aetherian script across their main display. "Helios Station. This is Admiral James Chen of the United Earth Fleet. Hold position and maintain calm. We are not here to harm you. There is something following us. Something worse." The message was so unexpected that for a moment, the entire command deck fell silent. Lyra's crystalline form rippled in confusion. This didn't match any of the stories about human first contact. "Something worse," Talon whispered, his voice barely a chime. "What could be worse than humans?" As if in answer, their long-range sensors lit up with new contacts. The readings made no sense. Space itself seemed to be twisting, folding in ways that shouldn't be possible. The human fleet's next transmission was shorter. "Prepare your defenses. They're coming." The holographic projectors in Helios's central command chamber sparked to life, materializing a figure that made every Aetherian present instinctively restructure their crystalline forms into defensive patterns. The humans stood nearly twice their height, encased in what appeared to be battle armor that made their already imposing frame even more massive. Lyra forced her form to remain stable, fighting against millions of years of evolutionary instinct screaming at her to fragment and scatter. "I am Admiral James Chen of the UEF," the human said, his voice surprisingly gentle despite his intimidating appearance. "And we have approximately 30 minutes before the first wave arrives." The darkness between stars. "Void entities," Admiral Chen's hologram explained, manipulating the three-dimensional display with practiced ease. "That's what we called them when they first appeared in the Orion Spur 3 months ago. But that name doesn't do justice to what they really are." The command center's holographic space filled with images that made Lyra's crystalline structure vibrate with instinctive horror. Shapes that shouldn't exist twisted through space, leaving absolute darkness in their wake. Not the darkness of space, which still held starlight and radiation, but complete absence, holes in reality itself. "Our scientists believe they're from another dimension," Chen continued, his armor systems interfacing seamlessly with the Aetherian technology. "One where the laws of physics as we know them don't apply. They don't just consume energy. They delete it from existence." First observer Talon's voice chimed with scientific skepticism. "That's impossible. The law of conservation of energy doesn't apply to them." Chen cut in, his voice carrying the weight of terrible experience. "We lost 3 colonies learning that lesson. Conventional weapons make them stronger. Energy shields just give them more to feed on. Even our most powerful antimatter warheads barely slowed them down." The sensor displays suddenly flared with warnings. Through the station's crystal walls, Lyra could see the stars beginning to distort, as if space itself was being stretched and twisted. "How?" she asked, forcing harmony into her voice despite her growing fear. "How have you fought them?" Chen's hologram turned to face her, and for the first time, she saw something like respect in his expression. "We adapted. Humans are good at that. We developed weapons that don't rely on energy. Gravity weapons, dimensional shears, weapons that tear space itself. But more importantly, we learned they have a weakness." The display shifted, showing footage from what appeared to be a battle. A void entity, a writhing mass of unspace, approached a human vessel. But instead of firing energy weapons, the ship released what looked like thousands of tiny mirrors. "Light," Chen explained. "Not as a weapon, but as a cage. They can consume energy, but they can't process reflections of themselves. It disrupts their ability to maintain coherence in our dimension. The mirrors have to be precisely aligned, creating a kind of dimensional feedback loop." "Our station," Lyra said suddenly, understanding dawning. "Our entire station is made of living crystal. We can refract and redirect light with perfect precision." "Exactly," Chen nodded. "Your station's crystal architecture might be the key to creating a large enough trap to contain them. But we need your help to make it work. Your people understand light and crystalline structures in ways we never could." A new alert sounded, its harmonics jarring against the natural resonance of the station. The sensor officer's crystalline form was vibrating with anxiety as new data poured in. "Hi, Admiral. The anomalies are accelerating. Energy readings are. There are no readings. Complete void spots appearing at coordinates 227 Mark 43. They're here sooner than expected." Chen's voice was tight with controlled urgency. "Hi, Admiral Nevin. I know you have no reason to trust humans. Everything you've heard about us, every story of our violence and destruction, they're probably all true. But right now, we're not just fighting for survival. We're fighting for the very laws of physics that make our universe possible." Lyra looked around her command center, at the 50,000 lives depending on her decision. The Aetherian collective had survived for millennia through peace and diplomacy. But as she watched the approaching void entities tear holes in reality itself, she realized that sometimes survival required adaptation. "Tell me what you need, Admiral Chen." "First, we need to evacuate all non-essential personnel to the core of the station. Then we need to repurpose your entire crystal superstructure into the biggest mirror array ever created, and we need to do it in less than 20 minutes." Through the viewing windows, Lyra could see the human fleet taking up defensive positions around the station. Their black ships, which had seemed so threatening minutes ago, now looked like a thin line of defense against the approaching darkness. "One more thing," Chen added, his hologram flickering as interference from the void entities grew stronger. "We need to be prepared for the possibility that this won't work. If we fail, those things will consume this entire sector within days, which means we need a backup plan." "What kind of backup plan?" Chen's hologram smiled grimly. "How much do you know about human battle plans?" The next 15 minutes transformed Helios Station into something unprecedented in either human or Aetherian history. Crystal corridors shifted and realigned as the station's living architecture responded to its inhabitants' will. Aetherian engineers, their crystalline forms resonating with focused intensity, worked alongside human technicians in environmental suits to convert the station's entire outer shell into an enormous optical array. "The void entities will be drawn to the largest energy source," Chen explained, his hologram walking through a three-dimensional model of the station, "which means we can predict where they'll strike first." Lyra watched as her beautiful station, once a symbol of peace and diplomacy, became a weapon. "The primary reactor core," she said, understanding the plan. "We'll make it irresistible to them." "Exactly. We'll power it up to maximum output, creating a beacon they can't ignore. But instead of finding an easy meal, they'll encounter this." The holographic display showed the station's new configuration. Every crystal panel had been precisely aligned to create overlapping fields of reflected light. What had once been decorative architecture was now a deadly trap. "Lieutenant Commander Santos, status of the gravity anchor deployment." Chen called out to one of his officers. A new hologram appeared, another human, smaller than Chen but moving with the same predatory grace in her battle armor. "Final anchor points are being locked in now, sir. The Aetherian's crystal tech interfaces are actually improving our targeting resolution by 300%. The anchors will hold the void entities in place," Chen explained to Lyra. "Long enough for your crystal array to create the dimensional feedback loop, but timing will be critical. If we activate the array too early, they'll detect the trap and retreat. Too late, and they'll have already begun consuming the reactor's energy." First Observer Talon's chimes were sharp with concern as he studied the tactical displays. "Even if this works, containing them will require precise control of every crystal facet. The computational requirements are beyond anything we've attempted." "That's where we come in." A new voice joined the conversation. Another human hologram materialized, a woman with close-cropped gray hair and eyes that seemed to glow with cybernetic enhancements. "Dr. Sarah Chen, Advanced Computing Division. No relation to our illustrious Admiral. Dr. Chen's team has modified our combat eye to interface with your crystalline computing networks," Admiral Chen explained. "The combination of human processing speed and Aetherian crystal architecture should give us the control we need." Lyra's outer layers rippled with surprise. The Aetherian collective had strict protocols about AI integration. Too many civilizations had destroyed themselves pursuing artificial intelligence. But watching the human technicians work, she saw something different. Their AIs weren't attempts to create new life, but tools, extensions of human will made with clear purpose and defined limits. "Time check," Admiral Chen called out. "Void entities will reach primary engagement range in 7 minutes, Santos reported. "We're detecting at least 30 distinct signatures, possibly more hiding in the spatial distortions." "Hi, Admiral." Chen turned to Lyra, his holographic form somehow conveying both urgency and respect. "Everything is in place, but there's something else you need to know. The backup plan I mentioned. It's not just about destroying the station if we fail. Lyra felt her crystalline core pulse with dread. Explain. The void entities don't just consume energy, they learn from it. If they absorb too much of your crystal technology, they might gain the ability to replicate it. Imagine them creating their own crystal arrays, turning your light-bending capabilities to their advantage. The implication sent harmonic tremors through Lyra's form. How do we prevent that? We've modified one of our dimensional shear warheads with crystals from your secondary arrays. If the trap fails, we'll need to trigger a resonance cascade that will shatter every crystal structure within a light-year radius, including the station, including your people. Silence fell over the command center. The Aetherian officers' crystalline forms vibrated with horror at the idea. Their very bodies would be destroyed at the molecular level. You're asking us to commit suicide if we fail, Talon chimed softly. No, Chen corrected. I'm asking you to prevent something worse than death. If these entities gain crystal manipulation abilities, they'll be unstoppable. Everything we know about physics suggests they could use it to tear holes between dimensions at will. Not just our civilizations, but reality itself would be at risk. Lyra moved to the viewing window, watching the human fleet spread out in a defensive formation. Their black ships no longer seemed ominous. They were a shield, protecting her people even as they asked them to make an unthinkable sacrifice. 3 minutes to contact, Santos announced. Void entities are accelerating. They've detected the reactor core. High Admiral. Chen's voice was gentle despite the urgency. We need your decision. Lyra turned back to face the command center, her crystalline form glowing with internal light. How do we trigger the resonance cascade? Both of us have to give the command simultaneously, Chen explained. A failsafe to ensure neither side can make this decision alone. Through the crystal walls, Lyra could see the first signs of the void entity's approach. Places where stars simply ceased to exist, as if someone had poked holes in the fabric of space itself. 2 minutes to contact. Lyra straightened, her form shifting into the formal patterns of Aetherian authority. Very well, Admiral Chen. Let us hope we need not use it. Begin primary operations sequence. Around the station, crystal panels began to vibrate in harmony, creating patterns of light that would either save or doom them all. The void strikes back. They came like tears in reality. Not black holes, but something worse. Where a black hole at least followed physical laws, these entities simply erased them. Lyra watched through the station's crystal walls as the first wave approached, their non-presence creating patterns that hurt to look at, geometries that shouldn't exist. First wave approaching optimal trap range, Lieutenant Commander Santos reported, her voice steady despite the impossible sight before them. Gravity anchors charged and ready. Energy readings from the reactor core are at maximum, Talon chimed, his crystalline form vibrating with tension. They're responding exactly as predicted. Admiral Chen's hologram stood at the tactical display, his armor systems interfacing with both human and Aetherian technology. Remember, we only get one shot at this. If the timing is off by even a microsecond. He didn't need to finish. They all knew the stakes. The void entities accelerated toward the station, drawn by the pulsing energy of its reactor core. Through the tactical displays, Lyra could see them more clearly now, rifts in spacetime that seemed to fold in on themselves, creating patterns that made her crystalline structure ache just from observing them. Range to primary engagement zone. 30 seconds, Santos called out. Begin crystal array power-up sequence, Chen ordered. Dr. Chen, status of the AI integration. The scientist's hologram flickered as she worked multiple interfaces simultaneously. Neural networks are synced with the crystal matrices. We're seeing processing speeds beyond anything we've achieved before. The Aetherian architecture it's beautiful. 20 seconds to optimal range. Lyra watched as the first void entity crossed the outer defense perimeter. The space around it didn't just darken. It ceased to exist. leaving a hole in reality that her mind struggled to comprehend. Gravity anchors engaging in 10, 9. The human fleet moved with practiced precision, their black ships forming a complex three-dimensional pattern around the station. Each vessel carried part of the gravity anchor network that would hold the void entities in place. 5, 4. All personnel, prepare for dimensional stress. Chen's voice echoed through the station. This is going to get rough. 2, 1. Gravity anchors activated. Space itself seemed to twist as dozens of overlapping gravitational fields snapped into place. The void entities, caught in mid-approach, suddenly found themselves trapped in a web of warped spacetime. Crystal array activation in 3, 2, 1. Now. Every crystal panel on the station's surface came alive simultaneously, creating a dazzling display of refracted and reflected light. The void entities, trapped by the gravity anchors, were caught in countless overlapping beams, their own unspaced nature reflected back at them countless times. For a moment, it seemed to work. The entities writhed in the light cage, their form-destroying nature turned back upon itself. But then something went wrong. Energy spike. Talon's chimes were sharp with alarm. They're somehow combining their effects. Gravity anchor failure in sections 7 through 12. Santos reported, her calm facade cracking. The dimensional stress is exceeding safety limits. Through the crystal walls, Lyra watched in horror as several of the trapped entities began to merge, creating a larger void that began to eat through the gravity anchor network. As each anchor failed, the massive void entity grew stronger. We didn't account for this. Dr. Chen's hologram flickered frantically as she worked the calculations. They're using our own trap to create a feedback loop of their own. The crystal array is actually helping them combine. Shut it down, Chen ordered. Shut everything down now. But it was too late. The combined void entity had grown to massive proportions, and as the crystal array powered down, it turned its attention to the station itself. The first touch of void space against the crystal structure sent harmonic screams throughout the station as reality itself began to unravel. Hull breach in sectors 3 through 7. We're losing structural integrity. Admiral, Lyra's voice cut through the chaos, her crystalline form pulsing with desperate intensity. The resonance cascade. We have to use it now, before they consume enough of our technology to replicate it. Chen's hologram turned to face her, and she saw in his expression the same grim determination she felt. Are you certain? Your people will die either way, she finished. But this way, we die protecting the universe from something worse than death. A new alarm blared through the command center as more void entities began to break free of the failing gravity anchor network. The combined entity was now large enough to be visible to the naked eye, a hole in reality that grew with each passing second. Admiral Chen, Lyra's voice carried the weight of 50,000 lives. Begin resonance cascade sequence. Chen nodded solemnly. Opening command interface. Cascade will require simultaneous activation from both of us. The holographic controls appeared before them both. Human and Aetherian interfaces merged into one final command. Around them, the station groaned as more crystal sections began to fail. Wait! Dr. Chen's hologram suddenly burst with intensity. The combination effect, we can use it against them. Explain quickly, Chen demanded as another section of the station crumbled into void space. They're combining because of how our light trap is structured. But what if we didn't try to contain them? What if we forced them to combine even faster? Lyra's crystalline form pulsed with sudden understanding. Overload them. Exactly. Everything has limits, even physics-defying void entities. If we can force them to combine beyond their ability to maintain dimensional coherence. How? Chen demanded. The crystal array is failing, and we've lost half the gravity anchors. Lyra straightened, her form glowing with internal light. We still have the reactor core. And we still have every crystal on this station. We don't need the carefully aligned array anymore. We just need raw power and as many reflective surfaces as we can create. Your people, Chen reminded her, the energy requirements would mean shattering our forms to create the maximum number of reflective surfaces, she finished, but not destroying them completely like the cascade would. We can reform, eventually. Around them, the void entity continued to grow, consuming more of the station with each passing moment. They had seconds to decide. All Aetherian personnel. Lyra broadcast across all frequencies, her harmonics carrying the full authority of her position. Prepare for emergency fragmentation on my mark. The fate of reality itself now rested on whether entities that denied physics could be defeated by forcing them to obey it. Light in the darkness. Fragmentation in 3, 2, 1. Now. Throughout Helios Station, thousands of Aetherian forms shattered simultaneously. What had been beautiful crystalline beings became clouds of microscopic shards, each one a perfect reflective surface. The station's corridors, chambers, and halls filled with a glittering mist of living crystal. Energy output from reactor core at 200% of maximum. Talon's voice had become a chorus as his fragmented form spread through the command center. Structural integrity failing. Hold position. Chen ordered his fleet. Maintain the gravity anchor perimeter with whatever we have left. Focus all power on containing the reaction. The combined void entity, now massive enough to engulf a small moon, pressed against the failing gravity anchor network. But as it touched the clouds of crystalline fragments, something new began to happen. Each microscopic shard reflected not just light, but the void entity's own nature back at itself, creating countless tiny dimensional fractures. It's working. Dr. Chen's hologram flickered wildly as she monitored the readings. The fragmentation is creating too many reflection points for them to process. They can't maintain coherence. Through what remained of the station's sensors, Lyra, now a dispersed consciousness thread through billions of crystal shards, watched as the void entity began to writhe in new ways. Its attempts to consume the station's energy were being reflected back at it from every angle, forcing it to absorb its own physics-denying nature countless times over. "Admiral," Santos called out, her voice tight with effort as she worked to maintain what remained of the gravity anchor network. "Something's happening to local space-time." The readings. "I've never seen anything like this." The void entity's writhing became more violent as it continued to grow, absorbing its smaller brethren, but unable to process the exponentially increasing reflections of itself. Space itself began to crack around it, but these weren't the controlled tears it had created before. These were chaotic, fractured breaks in reality. "All hands, brace for dimensional shear." Chen's voice cut through the chaos. "Dr. Chen, what are we looking at?" The entity's growth has become exponential, but its ability to maintain dimensional stability is linear. The scientist's hologram was almost unintelligible through the interference. It's exceeding its own operational parameters. The void entity's surface, if something that denied existence could be said to have a surface, began to ripple with new patterns. Where before it had been a perfect absence, now it showed flaws, breaks in its own non-existence. Detecting massive energy fluctuations, Santos reported. "Sir, it's not just consuming energy anymore. It's leaking it." Through her dispersed consciousness, Lyra understood what was happening. The reflections, they're forcing it to obey our physics. It can't maintain its own rules anymore. The entity's writhing reached a fever pitch. Space itself screamed as fundamental forces collided, the physics-denying nature of the void entities battling against the basic laws of reality, amplified and reflected countless times by the crystalline cloud that had once been the Aetherian people. Energy buildup critical. Multiple voices shouted at once. "Containment failing." "Everyone out," Chen ordered. "All ships, emergency temporal jump now." But before anyone could move, the entity reached its breaking point. For a fraction of a second, every shard of crystal in the station reflected the moment of its collapse. a reality-denying force finally forced to obey reality's laws. The explosion that followed wasn't one of energy or matter, but of restoration, as space-time reasserted itself with violent force. When the light faded and sensors came back online, the void entity was gone. In its place was normal space, filled with normal stars. The laws of physics, pushed to their breaking point, had snapped back into place like a stretched band finally released. "Status report," Chen called out, his hologram stabilizing as the interference faded. "Void entities, completely destroyed, sir," Santos reported, her voice filled with disbelief. "The dimensional readings are all normal. It's as if they never existed." The Aetherians. Shen turned to where Lyra's consciousness still floated as a cloud of crystal shards. "Can you restore yourselves?" The cloud shifted, billions of tiny crystals moving in concert. "Yes," Lyra's harmonic voice came from everywhere and nowhere. "Though it will take time. Our bodies are expressions of our consciousness. As long as enough shards remain intact, we can rebuild." Throughout the station, clouds of crystal began to coalesce, gradually reforming into Aetherian shapes. They were cruder than before, would need time to regrow their full complexity, but they were alive. "Admiral Chen." Lyra spoke as her own form began to reconstruct itself. "It seems the stories we heard about humans weren't entirely accurate." "Oh." Chen's hologram raised an eyebrow. "We heard you were warriors, destroyers, beings to be feared. We didn't hear that you were also protectors, willing to risk everything to save not just yourselves, but all of reality." Chen's hologram smiled slightly. "To be fair, we didn't know much about your people either. We thought you were fragile artists, too focused on beauty to fight. We didn't realize that sometimes the most beautiful things can also be the most powerful weapons." As the Aetherian crew continued to reform themselves, Lyra moved to the crystal walls, now pitted and scarred, but still standing. Through them, she could see the human fleet maintaining its protective formation around the station. "Perhaps," she said, her newly reformed crystalline structure catching the light of distant stars, "it's time for both our peoples to write new stories, together." In the space where physics-denying horrors had tried to unmake reality, two very different species had discovered something unexpected: that the greatest strength comes not from power or beauty alone, but from learning to combine both in defense of all that exists. The universe, it seemed, still had much to teach them all.